I have to set the scene because a lot of people don't know how the comic book industry works in terms of its sales and being able to identify that. Now, we've covered over the years like different reports. A lot of those reports come from like NBD book scans. They come from Diamond, which used to be the primary distributor of comics, like how much that were being sold according to their numbers to retailers. So the numbers were never really that accurate in terms of how many ended up in the hands of the customers. And I think that gets lost. I had a great conversation, for example, with the guys over at Kingdom of Comics, who had a comic book shop that recently closed down. And they talked about how even like with that the number one selling comic with that King Spawn of 2021, and how many variants that not just that they had, but one of the big incentive variants, and how that is utilized to boost sales. So nobody really knows because of that. And it's not like Marvel or DC or any of these companies are ever going to be open with how many they actually had even sold themselves. But it because of that middleman and the retailers, it gets very, very complicated when you try to figure out how many of those actually ended up on the shelves, or not ended up on the shelves, actually ended up in the hands of an actual willing paying customer. But with the breakup and all of that with Diamond, you got Random Penguin House and Lunar. Things are a little different now. And Comics Beat, which is one of the bigger kind of, what do you call them, reporters in this space, they brought this up as well not too long ago. And they said, whatever happened to the sales chart? Now, I do want to say before I get going, there is a video right here. This is it. It's titled LOL Cope Comics Are Thriving. Obviously, that's in quotes. A look at the data. I would encourage every single person to actually go watch that. If you are especially one of my haters, go watch it. If you're one of those that is under the moronic belief because you saw like Comicron's numbers, comics are thriving, we go into a more deep dive in terms of the data, and you can see that that is definitely comparatively to previous years. That is not what the data reads at all. There are less units being sold in comics, even to the stores. But as far as accurately getting this data, this is what Comics Beat has said. Sales charts, once we loved them, poured over them and argued about them, but since the distribution change of the last 3 years, the comic book sales chart has been one of the most notable victims. Diamond stopped doing them when DC left, started again briefly, then stopped again with their sales chart being released in April, or the last sales chart. So Diamond hasn't done one since April of this past year in terms of making some of that data that they have public. It's understandable that Diamond were less and less meaningful without Marvel and DC. So what this is referring to, for you guys that don't know, Diamond no longer distributes them. You have, again, Lunar, and you have Penguin Random House, who are handling their distribution. Diamond still does have, I don't know if they have Image anymore, but they have some of the major indies as well still. But yeah, he said, but that left us with no clear numbers except John Jackson Miller's heroic efforts at Comicron. But even there, he only has Diamond's advanced reorder charts in recent months. That's not to go on. So the numbers are just not as accurate. They weren't accurate before. Let's be clear. They weren't accurate before, but now they're saying they're not even, they're especially not as accurate now in terms of really trying to determine the actual sales of these books. As someone who has been putting up sales analysis since this site began, I'm frustrated by the lack of info, and so are many other people. Of course, other parties don't want numbers out there, but they seem to have the largest say. I can give it to you straight, okay? There's a reason why those numbers aren't public, okay? It's not just simply because of tax reasons and yada, yada. They don't have much incentive to make those numbers public, especially if those numbers are going to be even remotely accurate. Because we then can compare and contrast to previous years, and you'll see that the industry ain't doing as good as you'd like to think that it is. Again, the numbers weren't always that accurate because you still had that buffer in between the middleman, right? But still, why on earth would they not want to make those public? The guys that make the stuff public is myself. The guys that make the stuff public are people that like it in the crowdfunding space. Those guys are able to make their numbers far more public. But these legacy folk, they don't have any incentive because they're not thriving like that. They don't have any incentive because if it was booming to the degree that people pretended like it was, they'd have no problem. In fact, showing those numbers would reinvigorate the industry. It would light a fire up under people as they saw those numbers. I'm not quite sure why Diamond doesn't do charts anymore for their remaining publishers, or Luna or Random House's reasons for keeping theirs private. With that, that's another thing to mention. That now that there's 3 distributors, Diamond's now recently stopped, and I don't think Penguin, Random House, or Lunar has ever even done it. So the big guys, the big two, which controls a lot of the market, we have no idea what their honest numbers are. You can guess by way of doing like the ones that are in that NVD book scan like program or whatever, but that's still missing certain numbers and it's not really that accurate. I know some of these publishers would like to trumpet sales successes, but others want to lie now. Wait, who is this writing this for Comics Beat? Because they starting to get peeled. I'm certainly not imputing any dastardly motives to anyone. I will. You can put that on me. I do believe there are shenanigans at play. Let's say that. At the end of the day, it is private information. Very true. But it is something that I've been investigating on and off for a while, so consider this just an introduction. And what follows is some off-the-cuff thoughts, not a statistical analysis. For that, I'll leave it to Miller in the comments. But the topic has come up recently in a few places. First and most brutally, Paul Levitz rents CBR over an egregious piece called "The Top 10 Best-Selling DC Comics of All Time" that only went back a decade or so. The article was quickly taken down. Oh, so CBR, even the Shield Media, okay, taken down and listed as the top seller Detective Comics 1000 with an astonishing 574,000 copies sold. As the former president and publisher of DC, Levitz has as much knowledge of DC sales as anyone living, and he might be thinking among some other thoughts. The Death of Superman and Superman number 75 sold 6 million copies. Yeah, so it's basically like if those numbers are public, you can't do those top 10 sales charts, yada, yada. Because definitely as you go back more decades, guys, I'm trying to tell you, if you go back more decades, you'll see that the sales numbers now ain't even fucking close. You'll be lucky to get, like, I don't think that really happens at all in recent history, where you will get sales, even according to CBR's or Comicron's data, with ICV2, very rare these days are these comic books being sold by the millions, even more. I think King Spawn, and I'm going to see if I can find that according to their data. Let me see. I think King Spawn only sold 500 million, which I say only, like obviously that's a lot of sales. No, it didn't even hit that. Looking at it right now, it sold 480,000, right? The top Marvel one was Venom, and it barely hit 300,000. It ain't even close. The further you go back, the more you see like, wow, this industry has fallen the fuck off. Let's continue on here because, again, some insightful information here. Oh, excuse me. It says, ultimately, we don't know the best-selling DC comic of all time or Marvel comic or anything else because we just don't have the numbers. But CBR listed seemed to only cover the last 15 years or so and had like horrible headlines like this. The fact that is there something that I'm not aware of? Because I thought Comics beating CBR were like on the same team type shit. Not like by the same company. I mean, like for them to be going at each other like that is kind of interesting. Says, in spite of everything, All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder was number one was negatively sold well. Was negative sold well. Could be a model for an entire era of comics. Despite the jeopardy of they endured, CBR's sister site, Screen Rant, is still showing an article called Top 10 Best-Selling Image Comics of All Time, which tops King Spawn, which we just talked about. This would come as a shock to the Image founders, who regularly sold 1 million copies or so in the naughty 90s. Like I said, guys, in comparison to previous decades, this whole comics are doing the best that they've ever had is bullshit. You have to look at the data more accurately. You cannot just sit up here and, number one, take these guys' words for it. Number two, you can't just go by the money, right? When you consider inflation, you consider how much money is being spent on these books, how much they cost now on the upward of, even these floppies are $5 and whatnot. And I'm not knocking the price. That's not what it is that I'm saying. I'm just saying you can't say that they're doing as well as they've ever done when units by units sold, it's not even close, which that's the true determinant of the interest there for comics. I'm not talking about movies and stuff. For comics, units sold is the best you can do, even if it's to retailers. Units sold is more impactful than just looking at the sheer number. Yes, we can talk about the graphic novels and how they're accounting for now manga, which weren't, obviously being included in a lot of these numbers because it hadn't grown in the West like that in previous decades. That's a relatively new phenomenon. But yes, by individual numbers, like it says, back in 92, Spawn number one sold 1.7 million copies, bro. And you get the top selling comic, which in 2021, that's the most recent data that we had, according to Comicron. The top selling comic was King Spawn, and it sold, a third of that? There's a decline, guys, and it's gotten worse, right? The numbers are stagnant. So they can throw that number, we've made $2 billion. Those are people that, like the analogy I always use, there's a pile of crap in the room and everybody knows it's right there. They can see it, but they are pretending that the room does not stink. The Valnet site seems to be scraping selected Comicron numbers for those content forum stories, but come on, the comics industry didn't start in 2008. This is very true. Miller was involved in another discussion in sales charts, this time on Twitter, when he was asked what happened to the charts. Since it's Twitter, it's a lot of threads intertwined, but a few things came out. I brought up how at the panel with Diamond's Chris Powell and Lunar's Christina Merkler at the ICV2 Insider Talk at, I guess, Comic-Con 2022 in New York, I asked about the sales chart. Neither Powell nor Merkler thought any would be forthcoming. But Merkler suggested that sell-through charts might be what we eventually get. Eventually. So they're not going to make that data public, essentially, is what's being said between those two dominant, now that we have those guys in the scene or on the scene between Lunar and even with Diamond, it looks like they're not going to be making that data public anymore. And they are the sole distributors for these massive companies. Now, in case you are not aware, it is a curiosity of comic sales charts. They only measure sale into comics retailers. It's what stores ordered, not what consumers purchased. I've been making that point for I don't know how long. I didn't know Comics Beat was on this. Maybe I have to start giving them a little more credit, because I don't know if they've always been like this, but I felt that they had been part of this looking at the industry like it's just doing great. It's not. You have to be Miss the thing. It doesn't matter what it is on a philosophical tip. Okay? It doesn't matter what it is. You cannot fix a problem that you can't identify. Honestly. You can't. In order to deal with it, in order to be honest with it, you have to properly identify it and admit it and come to terms with it. But as long as folks are acting like the industry's just doing great, everybody's doing fine, comic book shops, despite them closing down, despite the unit sales being down, despite so many instances, you got Aftershock going out of business, bankrupt, IDW, stock is in the tank. People begging for money, begging access to their money that they would have made or should have made from the projects that they've completed as artists. The industry is messed up, okay? And if you can't admit that, you can't fix it. And I think why so many people don't want to admit it is because that would then force them to have to admit that folks that were their adversaries were right. And I think they would much rather pretend everything is honky-dory than admit that we were correct. Says, but this also leaves no room for the surprise hit or shocking flop. Correct. I'm a big believer that sell-through charts would be a big shock to the system of comics, but maybe lead to a different kind of accountability. But Miller pointed out that sell-in is important for collectors. Yes, obviously that would be very important, so they know how many books are actually out there in the market or being printed. I totally get that aftermarket part of it. But as far as like the accountability aspect, we can see whose books are really selling and what, how much they selling. Right? This is the thing about ISOM. We don't sell to well, let me say this: retailers are not our primary customers, right? I'll say maybe 2% of the sales. The rest is directly to y'all. So when you see the public numbers that are still public for ISOM 1, that data is honest. Is probably going to get for a company making those numbers public. You can see exactly how many people purchased cover A, cover B, and cover C, right? During that campaign window, right? Of doing that block. That's just what it is. It's not rotting on the shelves because all the comic book shops that bought it sold out anyway. While I have no beef with the collector market, viewing periodical sales purely through the lens doesn't seem the most healthy approach either. You got to have a healthy dose of both. Let the collector's market be the collector's market. However, enthusiastic readers that care about the story are the driving force. Morgan Perry, currently brand manager at Skybound, but previously the retail store sales lead at Boom, then chimed in with an interesting point. In writing, as someone who relies on these reports to project market viability and find appropriate comps for creators and series, I would like this data back. I would hope other folks in publishing feel the same. No, I'm going to tell you why most publishers are not going to feel the same, especially the big dog, because that would then become a reflection of themselves and their own individual failures. Now, we can argue all day long why it's the way that it is. I think it's a combination of different things, right? It's a combination of the content being bad, right? It turned people off, and, there are better alternatives, particularly across the way in the East, okay, with Japanese stuff, and they're kicking y'all's asses in your own market, right? But again, that would force you guys to admit the actual content problem that you're not, even in spite of doing all these billion-dollar comic book movies, right, all this investment that's being drove, still you can't sell more comic books. That should tell you something is fundamentally wrong with this system. So that is why I think, though they may know that internally, they don't want that to be affirmed or confirmed by the audience and by their competitors. So why would they make that data public? Because they don't benefit from that data being public. If they did, it'd be public because it had been, at least in some degree, before, right? At least with Diamond, when they would make some of it kind of public as far as what was selling to the retailers. At least you had that. Now you ain't even really got that no more. Perry and Miller both agree that we were back into dark times when publishers had to put together their own numbers and do their own comps, but they do it because they want data. Yeah, people are going to have to really ramp up their having people do their jobs and really figuring out what these markets want. But again, that maybe it's like, hey, if you don't uncover this information, you can't feel threatened by it type of situation. So pretend like it's not there, out of sight, out of mind. Some more information says, in his discussion of the unease out there, Harper points out that some publishers don't want sales charts. I think this is because some just don't want their bad numbers to get out there. I can stop reading there. And others aren't that interested in sell through to readers. The direct market is a hell of a drug. I think you guys can keep reading, but that's where it's at right there. There's some more decent information here as well, but that's it. That's why they don't want the numbers public. Because even in comparison to their colleagues or competitors, but especially in comparison to themselves, back in the gap, we know there's a problem. This whole comics is doing great in the American sense is a lie. You have individual successes for sure, and you'll have some anomalies here and there. But as a whole, the market is not thriving, and anybody that says that is lying. It's thirsty, meaning that people want material, but they're not getting it as far as that level of enthusiasm with the big dogs. It's simply not happening. And until they come to terms with that, it'll never get fixed. Which, cool. Those of us that are trying to be real with ourselves will do what it is that we can to get some sort of level of enthusiasm about the industry, about the actual hobby of reading comic books. We'll try. But nobody benefits from the dishonesty. Nobody benefits from the industry, certainly doesn't. I guess maybe the publishers are not putting out the numbers, making them public, because people will see how bad that they're actually doing. You see what I'm saying? So we'll see. We'll see. It's such an interesting thing and an interesting time. Wherever you're viewing the content, I appreciate you. If you enjoyed it, you may be interested in my comic book company, Rippaverse Comics. Our first book and campaign, ISOM #1, brought in $3.7 million with tens of thousands of satisfied customers. Visit Rippaverse.com to check out our store and stay up to date with the latest campaigns from one of the hottest new comic book companies. Also, my first big step towards a parallel economy was the development of my personal website, ericdjuly.com. This entirely replaced my Patreon. Now, if you enjoy this content, please consider becoming a member over at the website. We have an ever-expanding list of perks for various membership tiers, a forum, and a phone app. Some of these perks will even benefit you if you're fans of the Rippaverse. Anyway, I appreciate you so much for being a supporter and or customer. I even got a little love for my haters.